I've often wondered if there's a Guinness World Record for the most audacious abuse of neighborly, well, not even trust, just basic property rights. Because if there is, I think my former HOA president, a woman we'll call Veronica, might just have smashed it to pieces. What's the craziest thing an HOA has ever tried to pull on you? Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, because I guarantee this story is going to make your jaw drop, then probably make you laugh, and finally, make you cheer. It involves my pristine backyard, a 3-week luxury cruise I'd saved up for years to enjoy, and about half the neighborhood's unwanted junk being stored there, as if it were some kind of community self-storage facility, sanctioned by Queen Veronica herself. And the best part? Oh, the best part was the public auction I held to get rid of every last bit of it. Stick around, because this is a wild one. I'd been dreaming of this Mediterranean cruise for almost a decade. My work as a freelance historical cartographer, while fascinating, involves a lot of solitary hours hunched over ancient maps and digital archives. It's rewarding, but it's not exactly conducive to a vibrant social life or sun-kissed skin. So, this trip was my big escape. 3 weeks of ancient ruins, azure waters, and absolutely no thought of restrictive covenants or passive-aggressive community newsletters. I'd left my modest, 2-story suburban home in what I thought were capable hands, or at least in a neighborhood governed by what I presumed was a modicum of sanity. My lawn was manicured, my security system armed, and I'd even informed Veronica, our HOA president, of my absence, just as a courtesy. She'd given me one of her tight, insincere smiles, the kind that never quite reached her eyes, which were usually narrowed in judgment behind her oversized designer glasses. Veronica drove a pearl-white Cadillac Escalade, always wore sharply tailored pantsuits that looked like they cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, and had a voice that could curdle milk from 50 paces. She considered the HOA her personal kingdom, and the residents her slightly dim-witted subjects. Little did I know, she was about to extend her royal decrees to include my private property as a public utility. The cruise was everything I'd hoped for. I saw the Colosseum, wandered through the ruins of Ephesus, ate gelato in picturesque Italian villages, and generally basked in the freedom of being thousands of miles away from any mention of approved mailbox colors or lawn gnome height restrictions. The return journey was long, a series of flights and layovers, and by the time my taxi pulled up to my street, I was exhausted but still glowing with contentment. I remember thinking, home sweet home. Time to unpack, do a mountain of laundry, and then sleep for a solid 12 hours. That idyllic vision shattered the moment the taxi rounded the corner onto my cul-de-sac. From a distance, I saw a clutter, a chaotic jumble of shapes and colors in my backyard, spilling onto my normally immaculate flagstone terrace. At first, my tired brain couldn't process it. Was it a trick of the light? Had a localized tornado selectively deposited debris only on my property? As the taxi pulled into my driveway, the full horror became apparent. My backyard, usually a serene space with a carefully tended rose garden and a comfortable wicker seating area, looked like a cross between a flea market and a landfill. There was an old, rust-stained exercise bike leaning precariously against my prize-winning Peace roses. A stack of what looked like decomposing cardboard boxes teetered near my fence. A faded floral sofa, the kind you see on the curb with a free sign, sat squarely in the middle of my terrace, accompanied by a collection of mismatched plastic chairs. There were children's toys, a deflated paddling pool, several bags of what smelled suspiciously like old clothes, and even a small, dilapidated doghouse. For a moment, I genuinely thought I'd told the taxi driver the wrong address. This couldn't be my house. But there was my familiar oak tree, my bird feeder, now partially obscured by a stack of old tires, and my front door. My front door, which thankfully was still locked and secure. My stomach churned with a mixture of disbelief and a rapidly rising tide of anger. I paid the taxi driver, my hand trembling slightly as I fumbled for my wallet, and then I just stood there on my driveway, staring, It was like an episode of a bizarre reality show. Hoarders, HOA edition. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. Who would do this? And more importantly, why? My initial exhaustion was vaporized by a surge of adrenaline. Someone was going to pay for this. Oh yes, someone was definitely going to pay. My gaze drifted towards Veronica's meticulously kept, slightly larger house across the street, her Escalade gleaming smugly in her driveway. A very specific, very cold kind of determination began to set in. The Mediterranean sun felt a million miles away. The first thing I did, even before dragging my suitcases inside, was to walk the perimeter of my property, my phone already out, documenting everything. The sheer volume was astounding. It wasn't just a few stray items, it was a deliberate, organized, if aesthetically disastrous, collection of other people's belongings. My terrace, my lawn, even encroaching on my flower beds. It was a violation, pure and simple. I felt a knot of fury tighten in my chest. This wasn't just an eyesore. It was a profound disrespect. I tried to maintain a semblance of calm, telling myself there had to be some explanation, however insane it might be. Perhaps a misunderstanding? A colossal, multi-person, property line-defying misunderstanding? Unlikely. I dragged my luggage into the hallway, the familiar scent of my home now tinged with the faint, unsettling aroma of damp cardboard and someone else's discarded memories. My answering machine was blinking. An old habit. I still kept one. The first message was from my sister, wishing me well. The second was from Veronica. Her voice, oozing that familiar brand of saccharine condescension, filled my quiet hall. "Oh, hello, dear," it began, as if she were calling to discuss the annual bake sale. "Just a little heads up. While you were away, we had a bit of a community storage situation. Some folks needed a temporary spot for a few things. Spring cleaning and all that, you know. And your lovely, spacious backyard seemed like the perfect, underutilized solution. So convenient. We figured you wouldn't mind, being such a good neighbor and all. Everything should be cleared out. Eventually. Hope you had a wonderful trip." Click. My jaw, which had been progressively tightening, now felt like it was welded shut. Eventually? Underutilized solution? Figured I wouldn't mind? The sheer, unadulterated gall. She hadn't asked. She hadn't even bothered with the pretense of a notification before turning my property into a free-for-all. She'd waited until I was unreachable, then acted with impunity. The message was dated just 3 days after I'd left. This wasn't some last-minute emergency. This was a calculated move. The phrase, "good neighbor," dripped with an irony so thick I could have spread it on toast. I saved the message, a small, cold smile playing on my lips. This was evidence. My training as a cartographer involves meticulous attention to detail, cross-referencing sources, and building a case based on verifiable facts. Veronica had no idea who she was dealing with. She just saw a quiet, bookish woman. She was about to discover the steel beneath the surface. My vacation zen was well and truly gone, replaced by a laser-focused indignation. The game, as they say, was afoot, and I intended to play it by the rules, my rules, and the actual, legally binding ones. My first port of call, after a very strong cup of coffee and a moment to mentally gird my loins, was my next-door neighbor, Carol. Carol was a retired librarian, quiet, observant, and generally averse to HOA drama. But she had a keen sense of justice and an even keener pair of eyes. I found her tending her immaculate herb garden. When she saw me, her face registered surprise, then a kind of worried sympathy. "Oh dear, you're back!" she exclaimed, wiping her hands on her apron. I saw all that stuff. I've been meaning to call someone, but I wasn't sure who or what to say." I explained Veronica's voicemail, the contents of which made Carol's eyebrows shoot up into her silver hairline. "She told people they could?" Carol whispered, aghast. "Oh heavens. Yes, she did. It was at the last impromptu beautification committee meeting, which, by the way, only Veronica and her little sidekick, Agnes from down the street, attended. Veronica announced that since your yard was, and I quote, "generously sized and temporarily vacant, It would be an ideal community overflow resource point for residents undertaking spring decluttering. Carol rolled her eyes. She even had a little sign-up sheet, apparently. Some people were hesitant, but Veronica can be very persuasive. She assured everyone it was all cleared with you, that you were delighted to contribute to community spirit even in your absence. Delighted. I nearly choked on the word. So, it wasn't just a passive allowance, it was an organized, HOA-sanctioned invasion. Agnes, Veronica's main sycophant, a woman whose primary joy in life seemed to be agreeing with Veronica and reporting minor infractions, would have lapped it up. Did anyone object, Carol? I asked, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. Carol sighed. A few people mumbled, I heard. Young Mr. Henderson from 2 streets over apparently asked if it was legal. Veronica just fixed him with that icy stare of hers and said, "It's about community, Mr. Henderson, not tedious legalities. Are you against community?" That was Veronica's classic tactic. Frame any opposition as being antisocial, anti-everything good and pure. Most people just backed down. My blood pressure was definitely rising. This was worse than I thought. It was a coordinated effort, spearheaded by Veronica, enabled by Agnes, and participated in by a number of my neighbors who either believed Veronica's lies or were too intimidated to question her. I thanked Carol for the information. Her testimony, even informally, was valuable. She looked genuinely distressed for me. "If there's anything I can do, dear," she offered. "Just knowing the truth helps immensely, Carol," I said. "Knowledge is power, after all." And I had a feeling I was going to need a lot of it. My next step was to delve into the HOA's governing documents, the CCR's, covenants, conditions, restrictions, bylaws, and any published rules and regulations. I had a digital copy, and I settled in for what I knew would be a tedious but necessary read. As a cartographer, I'm used to deciphering complex documents, but HOA legalese is a special kind of linguistic torture. Hours later, fueled by more coffee and a growing sense of righteous fury, I found what I was looking for. Or rather, what I wasn't looking for. There was absolutely nothing in any of the documents that gave the HOA or its president the right to designate private property as a communal storage area. Nothing about community overflow resource points. There were, however, very specific clauses about maintaining property aesthetics, nuisance abatement, and the unauthorized storage of items on common areas, let alone private lots. Veronica hadn't just bent the rules. She'd shattered them and then danced on the pieces, all while claiming it was for the good of the community. I also made a quick call to a friend from university, Sarah, who is now a very sharp property lawyer. I explained the situation, keeping it brief. Her initial reaction was a stunned silence, followed by, "She did what? Is she certifiably insane?" Sarah confirmed my interpretation of basic property rights. My yard was mine. The HOA had zero authority to authorize its use by others without my explicit, informed consent. She also gave me some preliminary advice on how to legally notify the HOA and the item owners, if they could be identified, about the trespass and the need to remove their property. "Document everything," Sarah emphasized. "Photos, dates, communications, create a paper trail a mile long. And whatever you do, don't let her bully you." Bully me? Oh, Veronica was about to find out that her usual tactics wouldn't work here. The more I learned, the clearer my path became. This wasn't just about getting my yard back. This was about accountability. This was about making sure Veronica understood that her reign of arbitrary nonsense had limits, and those limits were starkly defined by my property line. The idea of the auction hadn't fully formed yet, but the seeds were being sown. If these items were considered abandoned on my property after due notice, well, abandoned property has a funny way of finding new owners. With Carol's information and Sarah's legal pointers, I began to formulate a plan. The first official step was to send a formal, written demand to the HOA. Not an email, not a phone call, but a certified letter with return receipt requested. This was serious business. I drafted it carefully, outlining the situation. my absence, the unauthorized use of my property as detailed by Veronica's own voicemail, a copy of which I gleefully transcribed and included, and the clear violation of my property rights, and, ironically, several HOA regulations regarding property maintenance and nuisance. I cited the specific CC/R articles Veronica had breached. My letter demanded the immediate removal of all items within 72 hours of receipt. I also stated that any items remaining after this deadline would be considered abandoned, and I would take appropriate measures to dispose of them, reserving the right to recover any costs incurred. I made sure the tone was firm, factual, and devoid of emotional language, though, believe me, my emotions were a raging inferno. I addressed it to Veronica specifically, as HOA president, and copied the HOA's official mailing address, ensuring there was no ambiguity. Sending that letter felt like firing the first shot in a war I hadn't asked for but was now fully prepared to win. While waiting for the inevitable explosion from Veronica, I started the less official but equally important task of trying to identify who owned what. This was where things got interesting, and a little depressing. I put up a polite but firm notice on my own front gate. All personal items currently stored on this property, Lot 42, without owner's consent, must be removed by date 72 hours from expected letter delivery. Items not claimed by this deadline will be disposed of. Please contact the HOA for clarification. I didn't want direct confrontations with individual neighbors if I could avoid it. This was Veronica's mess to manage. A few brave souls did approach me, looking sheepish. One young couple, the Hendersons Carol had mentioned, apologized profusely. Veronica swore you'd said it was okay. Mrs. Henderson said, her face flushed. She made it sound like we were doing you a favor by tidying up the neighborhood into your yard. The logic was so contorted it was almost admirable in its audacity. They had stored an old crib and a broken stroller. They quickly retrieved them, apologizing again. I was polite but didn't let them off the hook entirely. Next time, I said calmly, perhaps get permission from the property owner directly, not just someone who thinks they run the world. They nodded vigorously. Others were less apologetic. One man, who had deposited a truly hideous green La-Z-Boy recliner that looked like it had survived a swamp creature attack, grumbled as he dragged it away, muttering about uptight neighbors and no community spirit. I just smiled blandly. My community spirit did not extend to hosting his reject furniture. The certified letter was delivered on a Tuesday morning. I knew this because I tracked it online like a hawk. I imagined Veronica's face as she signed for it, perhaps thinking it was a notice about a particularly delightful new strain of petunia approved by the Architectural Review Committee. The reality, I hoped, would be a splash of icy water. The 72-hour clock started ticking. Wednesday passed with an ominous silence. No calls, no emails, no irate HOA president banging on my door. This was unusual for Veronica, who typically reacted to any challenge to her authority with immediate, overwhelming force. I suspected she was either scrambling, consulting with her enablers on the board, likely Agnes and a couple of other easily led individuals, or, more likely, underestimating me. She probably thought I'd send a stern letter, she'd ignore it, and I'd eventually give up and pay to have the junk hauled away myself. That was her standard operating procedure for dealing with inconvenient residents. Thursday morning, the deadline loomed. A few more items had been quietly spirited away in the dead of night, their owners clearly preferring stealth to conversation. But the bulk of it remained. The floral sofa, the exercise bike entangled in my roses, the teetering boxes, the sad little doghouse, and a truly impressive collection of what appeared to be someone's failed attempts at abstract sculpture using discarded plumbing fixtures. My backyard still resembled a post-apocalyptic yard sale. It was clear Veronica was calling my bluff, or thought she was. That afternoon, exactly 73 hours after the letter was signed for, I moved to Phase 2. The auction idea, which had been simmering, now came to a full boil. If these items were abandoned, and the HOA was refusing to take responsibility, then I would deal with them. And if I could recoup some of my trouble, and perhaps cause Veronica a considerable amount of public embarrassment in the process, well, that was just a bonus. My professional background wasn't in auctioneering, but as a cartographer, I'm meticulous, organized, and very good at research. I'd spent part of Wednesday and Thursday morning researching local ordinances on abandoned property and the legalities of holding a private sale of such goods. As long as I'd given reasonable notice, which I had repeatedly, and the original owners had failed to claim their property, I was generally in the clear to dispose of it, including by sale. The proceeds, legally, would be mine to offset costs, though I was already thinking a sizable donation to a local animal shelter, inspired by the sad little doghouse, would be a fitting end. I began by meticulously cataloging every remaining item. I took photographs, wrote brief, brutally honest descriptions, slightly terrifying floral sofa, questionable stains, possible home to small creatures, and assigned each a lot number. This process was both infuriating and darkly amusing. Who on earth keeps half a mannequin? Why would anyone think their neighbor wants their collection of chipped garden gnomes? The sheer range of unwanted possessions was a testament to consumerism gone mad. Then I designed a flyer. Public auction, it declared in bold letters. Abandoned goods sale. Contents of unauthorized storage on private property. Saturday, 10 a.m. sharp. Lot 42. My address. All items sold as is, where is. Cash only. All sales final. Proceeds to benefit local charities after recovery of nuisance abatement costs. I made sure to include a little line at the bottom. This sale is necessitated by the failure of responsible parties to remove items despite repeated official notification. Subtle, I thought. I printed 50 copies. I posted one prominently on my own gate. I walked the neighborhood, placing them on community notice boards, lampposts where permitted, and even slipped one under the windshield wiper of Veronica's Escalade. I also posted an announcement in a few local online forums and marketplace groups, complete with pictures of the more unique items. The response online was immediate, a mixture of curiosity, amusement, and a few declarations of "I'll be there." The local community loves a good spectacle, and the hint of HOA drama was like catnip. I even got a message from a local antiques dealer who was intrigued by the description of a vintage, possibly possessed rocking chair. The final touch was a call to the non-emergency police line. I explained the situation briefly. I was disposing of abandoned property as per legal guidelines after the HOA failed to act, and I was holding a public auction. I mentioned there might be some disgruntled individuals, namely the HOA president, and requested they just be aware in case someone, namely Veronica, tried to cause a disturbance or falsely report me for selling stolen goods. The officer I spoke to was surprisingly understanding, even chuckled a bit when I described the floral sofa. He said as long as I had my documentation in order, which I did, in a very neat, tabbed binder, it sounded like a civil matter, but they'd make a note of it. Good. All my ducks were now in a row. Or rather, all my unwanted junk was about to be. I spent Friday afternoon arranging the items in my backyard into vaguely organized lots, like a bizarre, open-air auction house. I even found an old megaphone in my garage, from a charity walk I'd organized years ago. It felt strangely appropriate. The calm before the storm. I almost felt a flicker of sympathy for Veronica. She had no idea what was about to hit her. Almost. Saturday morning dawned bright and clear. A perfect day for a public auction. I was up early, adrenaline thrumming, a thermos of strong coffee by my side. I set up a small folding table near my driveway for registration, basically just taking cash, and laid out my meticulously organized binder of documentation, copies of the certified letter, Veronica's voicemail transcript, photos of the initial state of my yard, the HOA CC, rupees, with relevant sections highlighted, and my research on abandoned property laws. I even had Carol's written statement, which she gladly provided, detailing Veronica's community overflow resource point announcement. I was ready. By 9:30 a.m., people started to arrive. Not just immediate neighbors, but folks from a few streets over, people I recognized from the local supermarket, and a couple of clear bargain hunters, their eyes gleaming with acquisitive light. The antiques dealer showed up, looking dapper and intrigued. There was a buzz of curiosity and anticipation. Mrs. Henderson gave me a supportive thumbs up from her yard. Carol was watching from her porch, a small smile on her face. Then, at precisely 9:48 a.m., the star of the show arrived. Veronica's pearl-white Escalade screeched to a halt at the curb, and she emerged, resplendent in a power-red pantsuit that practically vibrated with indignation. Agnes, her loyal-to-a-fault sidekick, scurried out after her, looking like a startled chihuahua. Veronica's face was a mask of fury. Her eyes, usually narrowed in calculation, were wide with disbelief and outrage. She marched up my driveway, Agnes trotting to keep up. "What is the meaning of this circus?" she hissed, her voice tight and low, but carrying clearly in the morning air. Several onlookers paused their perusal of a particularly sad-looking lamp to watch. "Good morning, Veronica," I said cheerfully, my voice amplified slightly by the megaphone I held, though I wasn't using it at full volume yet. "Welcome to the public auction of abandoned goods, as advertised. So glad you could make it." Her jaw actually dropped. "Abandoned? These are not abandoned. These are community assets, temporarily relocated." "Unfortunately, Veronica," I replied, my tone still pleasant but firm, "after a formal, written demand for removal was delivered to you as HOA president, and the 72-hour deadline passed without action, these items are, by legal definition in this jurisdiction, considered abandoned on private property. But don't worry, I have all the paperwork right here if you'd like to review it." I gestured to my binder. Agnes gasped dramatically. "She's bluffing, Veronica! This is outrageous." Veronica, however, seemed momentarily stunned. She glanced at the growing crowd, then back at me, her eyes darting around my yard at the displayed items, many of which she had personally authorized to be dumped there. "You can't do this," she finally sputtered. This is theft." "Actually," I said, picking up the megaphone properly now and turning the volume up a notch so everyone could hear, "it's perfectly legal. Notice was given, the deadline expired. These items are now being disposed of. Perhaps if the HOA had taken its responsibilities or my property rights seriously, we wouldn't be here. Now, if you'll excuse me, the auction is about to begin. Unless, of course, the HOA would like to make a bulk bid to reclaim all these community assets on behalf of their original owners. I'm open to offers." The crowd chuckled. Veronica's face went from red to a sort of mottled purple. Several people who I vaguely recognized as having items in the yard were now trying to shrink into the background, looking horrified. A man, who I now realized was the owner of the swamp creature La Z-Boy, which hadn't been reclaimed, stepped forward hesitantly. "Hey, that's my chair," he said, pointing. "Then you should have removed it when notified," I said coolly. "It's lot number 12. Bidding will commence shortly." He looked flabbergasted, then angry, then just defeated. He glared at Veronica. "You said it was fine. You said she wouldn't mind." Veronica ignored him, her entire focus a laser beam of fury directed at me. "I am calling the police," she shrieked. "Go right ahead," I said calmly, holding up my phone. "I already informed them yesterday of my intentions to hold a perfectly legal sale of abandoned property. They seem to understand the concept. Perhaps you can explain to them why HOA property was found trespassing on my land." That seemed to give her pause. The threat of official external scrutiny was something Veronica clearly hadn't anticipated. She was used to operating within her little kingdom, where her word was law. Out here, in the real world, with actual laws and observant police officers, her power was significantly diminished. The auction began. I started with smaller, less contentious items. A set of rusty golf clubs, vintage or just neglected. You decide. A box of old vinyl records, could be gold, could be mold. Bids were modest but steady, People were enjoying the spectacle as much as the potential bargains. Veronica and Agnes stood by the curb, fuming. Every time an item was sold, Veronica would make a noise somewhere between a hiss and a groan. The floral sofa was a hit. A group of college students, clearly looking for cheap apartment furnishings, got into a bidding war with a woman who said she needed it for her she-shed. The students won, paying a surprising $25. They looked thrilled. The exercise bike, once extricated from my rose bushes, which, I noted with grim satisfaction, had suffered minimal damage, went for $10 to a fitness enthusiast who said he could fix it up. The climax, for me, was the auctioning of the sad little doghouse. Lot number 32, I announced. A pre-loved canine condominium. Needs some TLC, but has potential. All proceeds from this particular item will go directly to the county animal shelter. Bidding was surprisingly spirited, and it eventually sold for $30 to a kind-looking woman who said she volunteered at the shelter and knew just the dog who'd appreciate it. Veronica watched this, her expression unreadable but undoubtedly sour. She must have known her authority was crumbling with every bang of my imaginary gavel. I was actually just saying sold. Some original owners tried to protest when their items came up, but the crowd, now firmly on my side and enjoying the drama, just shouted them down or told them they should have moved their stuff. The presence of the antiques dealer lent an air of legitimacy, and he actually bought a few oddities, including the possibly possessed rocking chair, for a decent sum, muttering about good bones and character. The entire auction took about 2 hours. By the end, my yard was blissfully, gloriously empty. Well, almost. There was still the matter of the teetering tower of decomposing boxes. No one wanted those, not even for free. All right, folks, I announced. The auction is concluded. Thank you all for coming. For our final, unsold lot, these delightful boxes of mystery, I'll be calling a junk removal service, the cost of which will be billed directly to the HOA, as per my original notice regarding recovery of nuisance abatement costs. Veronica, who had been simmering, finally exploded. You wouldn't dare. Oh, I think I would, I said, smiling sweetly. Consider it a community service, clears up my yard, and ensures the HOA fulfills its obligations, even if belatedly. She looked like she was about to have an aneurysm. Agnes was patting her arm, murmuring what I assumed were supposed to be soothing words, but probably just sounded like a yapping puppy. The crowd began to disperse, many of them congratulating me, some shaking their heads in amusement at the sheer audacity of it all. The antiques dealer gave me his card and said to call him if any other interesting situations arose. I assured him I hoped not. As the last of the successful bidders hauled their treasures away, Veronica made one last stand. This isn't over, she seethed, jabbing a finger in my direction. You've made a mockery of this community. There will be consequences. The only mockery here, Veronica, I replied, my voice calm and steady, was the assumption that you could treat my property and my rights with such blatant contempt. The consequences, I believe, are already unfolding. Have a lovely day. And with that, I turned and walked back into my blessedly empty backyard, leaving her fuming on the sidewalk. The air felt lighter. The sun seemed brighter. My roses, though slightly ruffled, looked like they were breathing a sigh of relief. The aftermath of the great backyard auction was, in a word, satisfying. The junk removal service came that afternoon and efficiently disposed of the remaining boxes of mystery, and yes, I sent the bill directly to the HOA, addressed to Ms. Veronica, Community Assets President, with a polite cover letter detailing the necessity of the expense due to their prior inaction. I heard, through the neighborhood grapevine, which was buzzing like a hornet's nest, that Veronica tried to refuse payment, claiming it was an unauthorized expense. However, when presented with copies of my certified letter, her own voicemail, and the photographic evidence of my yard, looking like a refugee camp for unwanted household goods, the HOA treasurer, a meek accountant named Arthur, who usually just rubber-stamped Veronica's decrees, apparently found his spine. He reportedly told Veronica that failing to pay would likely result in a small claims court summons I would undoubtedly win, costing the HOA even more in legal fees and public embarrassment. The bill was paid. The total proceeds from the auction, after deducting the cost of the flyers and my time, which I billed at a very reasonable nuisance abatement consultant rate, came to a surprising few $100s. As promised, a significant portion went to the local animal shelter. I even got a lovely thank you note from them, which I prominently displayed on the community notice board for a week. The rest I used to buy a new, particularly thorny climbing rose to plant along the fence line bordering the common area, just as a gentle reminder. The real fallout, however, was for Veronica. Her public humiliation was palpable. Neighbors, who had once been intimidated by her, now openly snickered when she passed. The story of the auction, embellished with each retelling, became local legend. Mr. Henderson, emboldened by the turn of events, started asking very pointed questions at HOA meetings about transparency, fiduciary responsibility, and the limits of presidential power. Carol, my quiet librarian neighbor, even nominated him for the board at the next election cycle. The enablers on the board, particularly Agnes, suddenly found themselves very unpopular. Agnes tried to distance herself from Veronica, claiming she had been misled, but no one was buying it. Her attempts to report minor infractions were met with eye rolls instead of compliance. The power dynamic in the neighborhood had fundamentally shifted. People realized that one person, armed with facts, determination, and a healthy dose of righteous indignation, and perhaps a megaphone, could actually stand up to an overreaching authority figure. The HOA itself underwent a quiet revolution. Several board members, unwilling to be associated with Veronica's regime any longer, resigned. At an emergency meeting, called by a group of concerned residents, led by Mr. Henderson, and encouraged by many others, including myself from a safe distance, Veronica faced a vote of no confidence. It wasn't an official impeachment, as our bylaws were vague on that, but the message was clear. Her authority was shattered. She didn't resign immediately, her ego wouldn't allow it, but she became a lame duck, her pronouncements ignored, her power neutered. By the next official HOA election, she didn't even bother to run. She sold her house within 6 months and moved to a gated community in another state, presumably one where she hoped her particular brand of leadership would be better appreciated. I wish them luck. My life returned to its peaceful, pre-auction normalcy, but with a few key differences. My backyard was mine again, pristine and unmolested. My roses flourished. I even installed a rather nice new bench where the hideous floral sofa once sat, a place where I could enjoy my morning coffee and reflect on the absurdity of it all. I also became something of an unofficial consultant for neighbors dealing with their own minor HOA skirmishes. People knew I understood the bylaws and wasn't afraid to speak up. The new HOA board, led by a refreshingly reasonable Mr. Henderson, implemented clearer rules about property rights and established a formal grievance process that didn't involve simply bowing to the president's whims. They even revised the rules about community beautification to ensure it didn't involve trespassing. It turned out that a little bit of suburban warfare, strategically waged, could indeed lead to lasting peace. The lessons learned were manifold. For me, it was a reminder that while I prefer peace, I'm more than capable of fighting for my rights when pushed. It also taught me the power of meticulous documentation and a well-executed plan. For the community, it was a lesson in collective responsibility and the importance of questioning authority, especially when that authority wears an expensive pantsuit and drives an Escalade. And for Veronica? Well, I hope she learned that other people's property isn't her personal playground. But somehow, I doubt it. Some people never learn, but they can be made to move. So, there you have it. That's how I ended up hosting the most unexpected, and frankly, most satisfying auction of my life. All thanks to an HOA president who severely overestimated her power and severely underestimated my resolve. What do you think? Was I too harsh? Or did Veronica get exactly what she deserved? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales of battling bureaucracy and entitlement. Trust me, I've got a few.